Recently, some lifelong Democrats like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Elon Musk announced that they were endorsing Trump. In the media, they're being called things like fringe, opportunistic right-wingers. But this doesn't make sense as an explanation. Liberals should get curious about what's going on because these people were far from right-wingers. Musk, whether you love him or hate him, is one of the most successful entrepreneurs on earth. He used to be a vocal supporter of Obama and once waited online for 6 hours to shake Obama's hand. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democratic member of the House of Representatives for close to a decade and served in the U.S. military, where she now serves as an Army Reserve officer. And Kennedy is, of course, from the most famous Democratic family in America. In the past, he was praised in the media for his long-standing work as an environmental lawyer, and establishment Democrats were happy to get his endorsements, like when Al Gore and Hillary Clinton ran for president. In October of 2023, he left the Democratic Party and decided to run as an independent candidate for president. The reason he gave was that the Democratic Party had departed so dramatically from what it had been in the past that it had become the party of corruption, censorship, corporate power, and war. Polls from late 2023 showed that his message resonated with people. It even had a higher favorability rating than Biden or Trump. But in August 2024, he suspended his campaign to back Donald Trump. Polls have also shown that Black and Hispanic voters have been drifting towards Trump. So what's going on? How could lifelong Democrats move to Trump? Here's the short answer. If you've been relying on corporate media for your news, like the New York Times or Washington Post or CNN or NBC, this shift will be completely puzzling. That's because they're failing to show you what's really going on. Just like in 2016, when the entire corporate media didn't predict that Trump would win the presidential election, they're missing a historic shift in the political parties happening now. This video will try to show you what the world looks like through the eyes of the people who are at the forefront of this realignment in the political parties. By the end, you can decide which side you fall on. The first thing you might have missed is just how much the media lies. Take what happened at the 2017 protests at Charlottesville. The media led people to believe that when Trump said there were fine people on both sides, he was saying that this included white nationalists and neo-Nazis. But if you actually listen to what Trump said in his press conference about the protest, it's clear that when he said there were fine people, he was talking about the people who were there to peacefully protest the removal of a statue.
And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country.
Notice that he unequivocally condemned any white nationalists and neo-Nazis. But Democrats still knowingly lie about what Trump said. Both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden lied about it in the most recent debates.
Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
People coming out of the woods carrying swastikas on torches, and singing the same anti-Semitic bile they sang when back in Germany. And a young woman got killed. They spoke to the mother, and they asked him. They said, "What do you think of those people? The ones who got killed, the one who tried to stop it, and the ones," he said, "I think they're fine people on both sides."
Let's look at another lie. During Trump's presidency, people were outraged when they saw photos from the border showing kids in cages. What they didn't mention was that those cages predated Trump's presidency. Those photos that MSNBC was just showing you, they were from 2014, when Obama was president. But I suppose we shouldn't be surprised because MSNBC is the Democratic Party's mouthpiece. They are indistinguishable from the Democratic Party. Those were the actual words of Basil Hamden, a writer and producer at MSNBC. He was caught on tape confessing to this in an undercover video.
So do you feel like MSNBC is doing enough to help the Harris campaign?
I mean, they're doing all they can.
Meet Basil Hamden, a writer and producer for MSNBC's weekend show, Iman.
What have they done to help the Harris campaign?
Amplify her message. What her message of the day is their message of the day. It hammers home the point that I'm making, that this news network is indistinguishable from the party.
Are they just the Democratic Party's mouthpiece?
Exactly.
MSNBC is the Democratic Party's mouthpiece.
Yeah. Viewers get mad at the guests or the hosts if the hosts were to criticize Democrats. They've made their viewers dumber over the years. I think brainwashing and dumbing down,
It's bad.
aggressive,
I get it.
helps Trump.
The media has also claimed that Trump incited violence on January 6th. Anyone who listens to his speech from that day will know that Trump made it clear that people should protest peacefully.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections.
I'll also link to the full speech Trump gave on January 6th so you can listen for yourself to see if there were any moments when he incited violence. There are many other lies told about January 6th. There are too many to cover here, but you can find more in this article here by Glenn Greenwald, whose work on the Edward Snowden leaks led to a Pulitzer Prize in 2014. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have also said misleading things about Trump's stance on abortion.
If he is elected again, I am certain he will sign a national abortion ban.
To be very clear, Donald Trump's asking for a nationwide abortion ban.
Wait, he
and
has said
again,
that
we don't see this as a winning
repeatedly
campaign.
that he will not sign a national abortion ban. Are you calling that just, it's a flat out lie?
Yes, of course.
Trump has made it clear that he's not in support of a national abortion ban, as he's made clear in an all-caps tweet, as well as in numerous interviews.
You wouldn't support a national ban?
No, I wouldn't support a national ban. No, I would not.
Trump has clearly said that he intends to leave this issue up to the states.
It's now up to the states. And like Ronald Reagan, I'm a believer in the exceptions, the 3 exceptions, as you know, and rape, incest, life of the mother, the danger for the life of the mother. And we have a situation now where it's in the states' hands, and the states are going to be voting. The last thing people want, the people are going to be voting.
Harris and Walz have continually brought up the case of a 28-year-old woman named Amber Thurman. They claim that she died as a result of Georgia's abortion laws, but she actually died after having complications from abortion pills. If you want to know the details of that, you can see this video, which will be linked below. Then there were lies about IVF. Here was Michelle Obama at the DNC.
Taking away our freedom to control our bodies, the freedom to become a mother through IVF like I did.
But Trump's made it clear that he supports IVF for women.
We want to make it easier for mothers and families to have babies, not harder. That includes supporting the availability of fertility treatments like IVF.
Let's also not forget all the lies we were told about Russia. For years, the media fed us stories about collusion between Trump and Russia. They told us that Putin had some kind of compromising information on Trump. They said there was a so-called Steele dossier that alleged there was a P tape that Russia had over Trump. The Steele dossier has now been completely discredited. In fact, it was paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Robert Mueller led an 18-month investigation into the allegations of Russian collusion and found no evidence for it. The entire story was a scam. There should have been a huge reckoning for the media then, but instead it's mostly just quietly faded away, although some media outlets haven't completely given up. There's much more that can be said about the Russiagate scandal, and this video would go on for too long if we talked about it all, so I will just link to some articles and videos below. All the links are from award-winning journalists who are politically on the left. There were many other lies told about Trump, like that he said we should drink bleach, or that he called soldiers suckers and losers, or about Project 2025, and you can find more debunkings on this at this site, which I'll link to below. The media has also lied about RFK Jr. No, he did not eat a dog. And they want everyone to think that he's a crazy anti-vaxxer. His views on vaccines are much more nuanced than that, and they're ones that a lot of Americans would agree with.
And I've never been anti-vaccine. I'm called anti-vaccine because that's a way of kind of marginalizing and discrediting me. But what I've said is I'm pro-science and pro-safety, and we ought to subject vaccines, which are mandated for healthy children, not for sick people. We ought to subject them to at least the kind of rigorous placebo-controlled trials that are mandated for every other medicine. It's the only medicine that's exempt from pre-licensing safety trial.
I believe we should have safe vaccines, and I believe we should have robust science, and I believe that we should have independent regulators who are not financially tied to the companies that make our vaccines. There's a couple of problems with vaccines. I had 3 vaccines as a kid. Today's kids get 72. And the reason they get so many is because they're so profitable. And they were made profitable in 1986 when Congress passed a law that said you can't sue a vaccine company. So no matter how toxic the ingredient, no matter how negligent the company, no matter how grievous your injury, you can't sue them, which means that company has no incentive to make them safer. And remember, the 4 companies that make all 72 of the vaccines that are now mandated for our kids are all serial felons.
He has been especially critical of COVID vaccines, but his viewpoints are backed by numerous scientific studies and statements from highly qualified scientists and doctors. I will link to a comprehensive article about that below. Part of the reason you haven't heard more about these studies or highly qualified scientists and doctors is that big pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer have so much money that they can advertise on all the corporate media outlets, so they can prevent certain stories from ever going out.
Is brought to you by Pfizer. CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer. ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer. This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
And by the way, the media has suggested that Kennedy is some kind of grifter who went into anti-vaccine advocacy for the money. But if anything, speaking out against vaccines is obviously a risk for anybody's reputation and earning potential. Until RFK Jr. became a so-called anti-vaxxer, he was well regarded as an environmental lawyer. As a Kennedy, he could have coasted on his name and lived out his days comfortably. It's much more likely that he would have earned more money by never saying anything about vaccines. I encourage you to actually listen to what he has to say in his own words. For example, here's a 45-minute speech he gave when he suspended his presidential campaign and announced that he was backing Trump. I'll link to that below. The media has also lied about Joe Biden. Here's Joe Scarborough from MSNBC talking about Biden on March 6th, 2024.
This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've known him for years. The Brzezinskis have known him for 50 years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it.
Those statements had been made less than 4 months before the presidential debate on June 27th, which showed to the world just how much Biden had been in mental decline.
Making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if We finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden.
And it wasn't just Joe Scarborough that lied about Biden's condition.
Is he up for a second term?
Oh, Chuck, 100%. Incredibly sharp, incredibly probing.
President Biden, who I've been around numerous times just in this last year, is sharp, he's focused, he's bright.
This is a man who is sharp, who is on top of his game, who knows what's going on.
He's pretty sharp, and he's got a very good grasp of the issues.
It's not a coincidence that all these supposedly independent media outlets all described Biden as sharp. It's obvious that they were all fed the same talking points. If you had followed certain independent media outlets, you would have known that Biden had been in noticeable mental decline for years. But the corporate media brushed those off as right-wing conspiracies. Speaking of talking points, here were some headlines after Kamala Harris went on a Fox News interview. The Guardian: Kamala Harris pledges break from Biden presidency in testy Fox News interview. NPR: Harris interview on Fox gets testy. CNN: Kamala Harris spars with Fox News anchor in testy interview. Again, they were all fed the same talking points.
He actually has been president, and the disaster that you tell me would befall us were he to be reelected didn't occur. The other thing is, half the country supports him. Why do you think that is? That's an indication of A, his acceptability to a good deal of our compatriots, but B, of the weakness of the other side. I'm not supposed to notice that. So to think that you can disqualify him with a characterological argument, oh, he's nuts, oh, he's crazy, oh, he's venal, oh, he's a bad man, oh, he's stupid, oh, he's a fraud, oh, he's a whatever. Those are Democratic Party talking points. They don't address where the union vote is going. They don't address where the working class vote. Why is it that non-college educated whites are supporting him in such numbers? They don't address why blacks, including black men, but not limited to them, are showing a good deal more favor to Trump in 2024 than they did in 2020, than they did in 2016, and what's going on in the country. Trump is a legitimate voice of an extremely important element of American political life. And I think that just has to be taken on board. The world will come to an end if Trump wins the election. I don't think so.
None of this is to say that Trump doesn't have flaws, and we'll get into some of those later. But you have to question what you were told about him, because as you've seen, the media and Kamala Harris have lied constantly about both him and his constituency. And that brings us to the issue of free speech. This is a central issue for some of the former Democrats who have moved to Trump. That's because the Biden administration has been using big tech to censor U.S. citizens. Mark Zuckerberg, co-founder and CEO of Meta, formerly known as Facebook, has said that the Biden administration pressured Facebook to censor Americans. This is a letter from Zuckerberg that attests to this. It was written as part of an investigation into potential government censorship of Americans, led by the House Judiciary Committee. In the letter, Zuckerberg wrote, "In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree." So, to be clear, this was not just some private company deciding to censor U.S. citizens. This was the U.S. government pressuring a private company to censor U.S. citizens for them. Of course, the government isn't allowed to censor citizens, but they got the social media companies to do the dirty work for them. The Biden administration also got Twitter to censor. They censored academics like Jay Bhattacharya, an epidemiologist and professor of medicine at Stanford University. During the COVID pandemic, he and Martin Kulldorff, who at the time was professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and Sunetra Gupta, epidemiologist at University of Oxford, got together and co-authored a document called the Great Barrington Declaration. This was a document that expressed grave concerns with government COVID policies. It recommended focused protection of those who were most vulnerable to COVID-19, instead of indiscriminately locking everyone down. Here's what they said. "We know that vulnerability to death from COVID-19 is more than 1,000-fold higher in the old and infirm than the young. Indeed, for children, COVID-19 is less dangerous than many other harms, including influenza. The most compassionate approach that balances the risks and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death to live their lives normally, to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection, while better protecting those who are at highest risk. We call this focused protection." The declaration got over 940,000 signatures. Over 16,000 were from medical and public health scientists, and over 47,000 were from medical practitioners. But if you never heard about this document or only saw negative headlines about it, it was because there was a campaign to undermine it. In fact, Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, were part of the campaign to discredit the Great Barrington Declaration. We know this because emails between the two of them were released due to a Freedom of Information Act request. Here's an email where the head of the NIH, Francis Collins, tells Anthony Fauci that they need to take down the Great Barrington Declaration. He links to the Great Barrington Declaration here. Then he says, "This proposal from the 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention, and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Levitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway?" Later that day, Fauci responded with an email that linked to this article to indicate to Francis Collins that indeed, a quick and devastating published takedown was underway. There were several things that were remarkable about what these emails revealed. It showed that our health officials were not interested in outside opinions from other experts. But also, it's remarkable that they were calling the founders of the Great Barrington Declaration fringe epidemiologists when they were from institutions like Stanford, Harvard, and Oxford universities. When Dr. Jay Bhattacharya learned of these emails, he tweeted this: "So now I know what it feels like to be the subject of a propaganda attack by my own government. Discussion and engagement would have been a better path." Jay Bhattacharya and others had also been actively censored on social media.
The crux is that the Biden administration essentially set up its government so that it would go to social media companies, tell the social media companies, you must censor these people and these ideas, where they would list out the ideas, ideas like the evidence on masking is not so good, that there is immunity after COVID recovery, that the vaccines don't stop you from getting and spreading COVID. They would go to social media companies and say, you need to censor people that say these things on social media posts. You need to develop algorithms that automatically identify posts that have those ideas in them. You need to suppress the reach of them, and you need to suppress a list of people. It turns out that I had been placed on this blacklist the day I joined Twitter in 2021.
What did it feel like when you are reading, something and then you are on a blacklist in the United States of America, your adoptive country?
It was surreal, Nick. I grew up, as you said, in the United States, and I went to school in the United States from when I was 4. The American civic religion is free speech. Of course, that could never happen in modern America. And then to see my name on a blacklist I didn't know how to process it.
The government says we were not insisting on this. Is that just, in your mind, that's just BS?
I mean, there's a line, but the government crossed the line. In the discovery of the case, what you find is it's a range of things. There's things like that, which is like, we're not sure.
Yeah.
But ranging to, kick these people off or else. The or else was very often Section 230. Section 230 is a part of the Communications Decency Act.
Right.
And it enables social media companies to exist. Right.
It's the Internet's First Amendment.
Exactly. Right. So like you can publish something. I can publish something on Twitter, and then Twitter can't get sued if I lie about somebody else. So the implication would be, if you don't cooperate with us, we're going to go after you using legislative and regulatory mechanisms to take away some of those protections. In the House did its own investigation of the Facebook files, and what they found was that Facebook will have these internal discussions where they'd say, well, if we don't cooperate, we're not going to be able to get some of these legislative priorities that we really need to survive as a company. The response from the social media companies reads like a hostage situation. Like they're trying their best to try to negotiate with people that have held themselves while being held hostage, to the power that the government has over them.
If epidemiologists like Jay Bhattacharya and others hadn't been censored, we might have lifted lockdowns much sooner. This probably would have been much better for society because, in retrospect, it looks increasingly clear that lockdowns cause irreparable harms. During lockdowns, people with addictions weren't able to go to support group meetings, although liquor stores were allowed to remain open. Isolated people or people with mental health issues could not engage in person with their communities, churches, or therapists. We also saw an increase in depression and anxiety. Cancers and other health issues were not caught early as people delayed screenings. People were blocked from visiting their dying loved ones in hospitals. It was also the largest wealth transfer in history to the super rich. Small businesses had to shut down, but Walmart was allowed to stay open. We also had supply chain issues, record money printing, and accelerated inflation. School closures meant a lot of children got behind in education, especially those from poor backgrounds. We had an increase in deaths of despair, like suicide, or deaths from alcohol or drug overdoses. We have many studies that strongly suggest that lockdowns didn't affect the rate of COVID-19 mortality anyway. In the end, lockdowns may have caused more deaths than they saved. I encourage you to check out this comprehensive review on the impact of lockdowns. The article said, "This cumulative academic research shows that the collateral damage of the pandemic response was substantial, wide-ranging, and will leave behind a legacy of harm for hundreds of millions of people in the years ahead. Many original predictions are broadly supported by the research data, including a rise in non-COVID excess mortality, mental health deterioration, child abuse and domestic violence, widening global inequality, food insecurity, lost educational opportunities, unhealthy lifestyle behaviors, social polarization, soaring debt, democratic backsliding, and declining human rights." According to the same House Judiciary Committee investigation mentioned earlier, the Biden administration also pressured social media companies to censor content about the origins of SARS-CoV-2. Much of the media said that it was just conspiracy theory to suggest that SARS-CoV-2 came from a lab, but it had never been controversial in the past to acknowledge that lab leaks happened. For example, here was a report from 2004 from the journal Science, which is an academic journal with one of the highest reputations. It said, "Investigators are convinced that the infections in April involved 2 separate biosafety lapses within the Institute of Virology at China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Beijing, but they've been unable to pin down what went wrong. With 4 separate infections within the last year at 3 different institutions in Beijing, Singapore, and Taipei, health experts fear that the next SARS epidemic may be more likely to emerge from a research lab than from the presumed animal reservoir." So here they reported that there were 2 separate incidents that resulted in infections in just that 1 year. It goes to show how lab leaks were surprisingly common. Now that enough time has passed, some corporate media outlets now admit that the virus could have come from a lab. But what they don't say is that the scientists who had said this at the start of the pandemic had been vilified or censored. Social media companies also censored or suppressed information about COVID vaccines, even if they were true. Here's just one example out of many. This tweet got a journalist suspended on Twitter. The tweet said that the vaccines didn't stop infection or transmission, and also expressed an opinion on the vaccines. Now, even if the tweet had been false, it shouldn't have been censored according to our right to free speech. But what the tweet said was correct, and it was easy to know at the time. By then, we'd already had multiple lines of evidence that the vaccine did not stop infection or transmission, including reports from the CDC. We'd also had data from a large CDC-sponsored study, which showed that vaccinated and unvaccinated people who were infected with SARS-CoV-2 had similar viral loads. I'll link to that study below. Stories about the safety of the COVID vaccines were also censored or suppressed. Facebook shut down support groups for vaccine-injured people.
The post-vaccine tinnitus sufferers we spoke with sought medical care, but they said providers were reluctant to believe them and unsure about the best treatments. Online support groups also hit roadblocks. George says Facebook shut down his group.
This is something that some people think is misinformation, but it is the truth. It is actually happening.
Dr. Robert Malone was one of the original inventors of mRNA vaccine technology. Despite the fact that he helped make mRNA vaccines possible, he warned of their dangers, especially for young people. In 2021, he was suspended on both Twitter and LinkedIn. There were many other dissident scientists and doctors who did not agree on the safety of COVID vaccines, but tragically, the American people did not get to hear from them because they were censored or suppressed. If you'd like to learn more about what they said, you can go to this article, which I already mentioned earlier. It will be linked to below. Now let's talk about another case of censorship, one which might have swayed the 2020 presidential election. In April 2019, a computer was dropped off at a repair shop in Delaware. The customer who brought the laptop in never picked it up, even after the shop owner repeatedly contacted him. So according to typical contracts at laptop repair shops, the owner of the laptop essentially forfeited ownership. So the shop owner looked through the laptop, realized it belonged to Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, and alerted the feds of its existence. But before turning the laptop over to the FBI, the shop owner made a copy of it and gave it to Robert Costello, who at the time was the lawyer for Rudy Giuliani. Eventually, Giuliani gave a copy of the laptop to the New York Post. The New York Post then published a story based on the laptop. The story would have been damaging to Joe Biden. It wasn't just that there was salacious material on the laptop, but there were emails which showed that Hunter Biden was using his father's position and influence in order to get some incredibly lucrative business deals with foreign companies that had intimate ties to our government, like Burisma, an energy company in Ukraine. The emails also showed that this was happening with the apparent awareness of Joe Biden. It turns out that the laptop was authentic. In fact, Hunter Biden tried to sue Giuliani and the repair shop owner for accessing his private information, but he's since dropped the case. The laptop has also been used as evidence in court cases, and the corporate media now widely acknowledges that, in fact, the laptop had been authentic.
You're confident, based on your analysis, this is Hunter Biden's data and that it's real?
Yes.
So it's now, without a doubt, that the laptop was authentic. But back when it mattered, when the New York Post story had first come out just 3 weeks before the 2020 presidential election, when Joe Biden was running against Trump, the corporate media had all called it disinformation.
It's a story raising concerns about whether it's real or just designed to sow confusion in the final weeks of the election.
Experts say it has all the hallmarks of information laundering.
This looks like your classic disinformation campaign.
And by the way, it would have been easy for any media outlet to determine pretty quickly that the laptop was authentic. You could just go through the emails and contact the people at the other end of the emails and ask them, was this your email? You could know the authenticity of the laptop within hours or days at the most. But the corporate media didn't bother to do this, or if they did, they lied about it. It gets worse. Some former intelligence officials helped to discredit the laptop story. Over 50 former intelligence officials had signed a letter that suggested that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. But there were 3 major problems with this letter. First, in the letter, they didn't actually provide any evidence for what they were saying. Here's what they wrote. We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement, just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case. The second problem with this letter was that it came from some people who were not exactly credible. The first guy who signed the letter was James Clapper, former director of national intelligence, who flat out lied under oath when he said that the NSA does not spy on individuals.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
3 months after Clapper said that, Edward Snowden came forward and leaked documents that proved that Clapper had lied. The NSA had, in fact, been spying on Americans for many years. The second guy listed on the letter, Michael Hayden, has also lied about NSA spying and torture programs. But here's the worst problem with the letter. We now know that it was politically motivated. Anthony Blinken, who at the time was senior advisor to the Biden campaign, and now serves as Biden's Secretary of State, had set the letter in motion. The reason we know this is that one of the people who signed the letter, Michael Morell, testified to this under oath, under a House investigation. In his testimonies, Morell also admitted that one of the reasons for the letter was to help Joe Biden get elected. And one of the goals was to give Joe Biden a useful talking point about the issue during the upcoming presidential debate. Here was the email in which Morell asks John Brennan if he could sign the letter. He said, "Can I add your name to this list?" Trying to give the campaign, particularly during the debate on Thursday, a talking point to push back on Trump on this issue. And 3 days later, Joe Biden did, in fact, use this talking point at the presidential debate.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this
that's
where you're
exactly
going?
what.
This is where he's going.
Not only did these intelligence officials interfere with our domestic politics, but they got big tech to censor the laptop story. In the Mark Zuckerberg letter that was mentioned earlier, Zuckerberg said that the FBI had gotten them to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story. Because of what the FBI said, Facebook algorithmically suppressed the story so that it couldn't reach too many people. On Twitter, the story had been completely censored. At the time, if you had even tried to link to that story, Twitter would block it. Here's what it looked like when someone tried to link to that story at that time. This was before Elon Musk owned Twitter, by the way. Again, almost the entire corporate media got this story wrong and said that the laptop story was Russian disinformation, but we now know that they were the ones spreading disinformation. Corporate media outlets often talk about how dangerous misinformation is. But this isn't because they care about misinformation. This is about the fact that more and more people have woken up to how dishonest the corporate media is, and how the corporate media is increasingly under threat by independent outlets, which is why they attack free speech platforms like Substack. And yes, misinformation can be dangerous, but societies have always had to deal with misinformation. It's a very human problem, and there's never been an easy solution. But the corporate media wants to tell you that they should be the trusted news source to tell you what's misinformation or not.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Unfortunately, Democrats are all in on this campaign of fear-mongering about misinformation.
There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech.
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Waltz himself was actually spreading misinformation during the debate. Misinformation and hate speech are protected under the First Amendment. It's also a myth that crying fire in a crowded theater is some kind of exception to free speech. It's not. The expression comes from a non-binding claim in a Supreme Court decision from 1919, which was later overturned. Kamala Harris has also made some chilling statements related to free speech.
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, if you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
Of course, nobody likes misinformation or hate speech, but the First Amendment is there because allowing misinformation and hate speech is preferable to the much bigger threat of allowing some authority, like the government, to decide what speech is allowed. It used to be that only a minority of Democrats thought that the government should take steps to restrict free speech online. There's a graph showing how much that's changed. In 2018, only 40% of Democrats thought we should restrict false information online. In 2021, that shot up to 65%. Again, nobody likes false information spreading around, but to say that the government should be the one to restrict false information? Let's not forget that leaders in our government censored highly qualified experts during COVID and spread misinformation themselves.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Yeah. Our own government institutions, which exist to serve the people, they are being weaponized against us. Attorney General Garland charged his newly created domestic terrorism unit with targeting those who hold, quote, anti-authority views. That included parents who dared to protest at Board of Education meetings, concerned and standing up for the right for themselves to have a say in their children's education. A draft copy of the Department of Homeland Security Quadrennial Homeland Security Review outlined their intent to target, quote unquote, inaccurate information on a whole host of topics, to include the origins of COVID, vaccines, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and U.S. support to Ukraine. Their misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation team exists to, quote, counter all types of disinformation. Once again, they get to determine what this disinformation is. The cozy relationship between the White House officials, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and big tech is now well documented and results in private companies not restricted by the First Amendment doing the dirty censorship work of those in government who are not legally allowed to do so themselves.
A government that has the capacity to silence its critics has a license for any atrocity. And we are, we're in a very frightening time now where we are seeing the normalization of censorship. The First Amendment protects speech, true speech, and it protects lies.
Right.
It protects good speech and it protects bad speech.
Right.
They didn't pass the First Amendment to protect speech that everybody likes. They passed it to protect the speech that's inconvenient, that's abhorrent, and nobody wants to hear, that's dangerous. That is the price of democracy. And the fact that we now have political leaders who do not understand this. I mean, I remember in 1976, when the entire liberal establishment supported the ACLU in defending the right of Nazis to march through a neighborhood in Skokie, Illinois that was largely populated by Holocaust survivors.
Correct.
And everybody was appalled by what their message was. We also understood we had to be we had to be willing to die for their right to say things that were abhorrent. And if we don't have that, democracy is gone. We're going to lose it.
Look what's happened to Elon Musk. And Elon Musk should be the hero of the Democratic Party. Of the old Democratic Party, he wouldn't be the hero. Somehow he became a villain because he was actually the only platform that would allow free speech on his platform. And he's now become a villain because of it.
I believe in moderation, but I don't believe in
censorship. Moderation is a propaganda word for censorship.
But don't you think free speech is one thing, right? Or not,
Look, if something's illegal, we're going to take it down. If it's not illegal, then we're putting our thumb on the scale and we're being censors.
You're putting your thumb on the scale for moderating hate speech. I mean, you don't put out child pornography. That's not...
It's illegal.
Some people would say that's considered censorship. I'm just saying,
No, I literally, Don, I literally said, if something is legal, okay, we will obviously remove it.
Okay.
But if it is not legal, the laws in this country are put forward by the citizens. We're a democracy. If those laws are put in place by the people, we adhere to those laws.
Okay, I agree.
To the laws of others. If you go beyond the law, you're actually going beyond the will of the people.
Because the Democratic Party does not believe in the people. If you don't believe in free speech, it means because you don't trust the people. You don't trust them to figure it out on their own, and that the government has to protect them from dangerous information, from things that might put bad ideas into their heads. And it's very patronizing, but it's also very manipulative. And you will not find a single Democrat who will criticize it.
The Democratic Party keeps saying that they're the party for democracy, that they're defending democracy against Trump. But let's look at their record. They installed Kamala Harris, a candidate who never received a single primary vote. She was handpicked by the Democratic Party elites. In 2016, the DNC also tipped the scales in favor of Hillary Clinton so that she would be the nominee instead of Bernie Sanders. And for this upcoming election in 2024, they've tried to keep candidates off the ballot in multiple states. This includes Trump, RFK Jr., Cornel West, and Jill Stein, the candidate for the Green Party.
Is the Democrats who bragged starting back in March that they now had an army of lawyers to basically exercise lawfare, looking for trivial details where they could do a gotcha and get us thrown off the ballot, violating the spirit of the law to basically eliminate their competition. They have also advertised publicly for infiltrators and spies to mess up our ballot drives.
Here's Nicole Shanahan, who was Kennedy's running mate before he suspended his campaign to back Trump. She describes what the DNC did.
The DNC made that impossible for us. They have banned us, shadow banned us, kept us off stages, manipulated polls, used lawfare against us, sued us in every possible state. They've even planted insiders into our campaign to disrupt it and to create actual legal issues for us. I mean, the extent by which the sabotage they've unleashed upon us. It's mind-blowing. I mean, we're still learning new ways that they have sabotaged us. I really wanted a fair shot at this election, and I believed in the America that a little girl pledged an allegiance to. And that is not where we are today. And it's not because of the Republican Party taking us out. It is exclusively because of the Democratic Party taking us out. And I am so disappointed I ever helped them. I am so disappointed that I helped Chuck Schumer in that Georgia runoff secure a majority. It's probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life.
Shanahan herself was once a big Democratic Party supporter, but as you can see, she regrets having supported them. The Democratic Party has also weaponized the DOJ. Have you ever wondered why the Trump indictments didn't come years earlier?
The timing of all of these charges against Trump is not an accident. Wow. The fact that they want to hold multiple court hearings for these charges the day before Super Tuesday, which is a major turning point in any candidate's election. They want to kick off these court hearings the day before Super Tuesday. It's not an accident. This is all happening right now.
It's Banana Republic stuff.
It really is. And that's what they're doing is, again, these terrible things that are happening in our country are happening because we have people in power who care more about themselves and their power than they do about the people, this country, our Constitution, our democracy. They are setting this incredibly dangerous precedent that now, much like many banana republics in the world, whoever's in power has the ability to politicize and weaponize that power to go after their political opponent. Take away whatever people think about Trump or whatever. Right. The consequences and implications of what is actually happening and what so many of the Democrat elite are justifying in the name of protecting democracy is actually destroying it.
Many Americans think that the charges against Trump are trumped up. Take the accusations that Trump violated the Espionage Act by holding onto classified documents. First of all, everyone acknowledges that presidents can declassify documents unilaterally. But also, Biden did the same thing back when he was vice president. Now, back in 2016, when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton and said things like, lock her up, and people chanted this at his rallies, it was completely fair to say that this kind of rhetoric was concerning. But in the end, he was in office for 4 years, and he didn't try to prosecute or lock her up. On the other hand, Democrats are prosecuting their political enemy and trying to put him in prison, which is arguably worse. Then there was a case that Manhattan District Alvin Bragg brought against Trump, which alleged that Trump improperly misaccounted for payments to Stormy Daniels, and this somehow justified 34 felony counts. Even liberal media outlets admit that this relies on some dubious legal theory. Even Jack Goldsmith, a law professor and vocal Trump critic, warned in a New York Times op-ed that this did not look good for the Biden administration, that it looked like the administration was going after its political enemy. There is no getting around the fact that the indictment comes from the Biden administration when Mr. Trump holds a formidable lead in the polls to secure the Republican Party nomination and is running neck and neck with Mr. Biden, the Democratic Party's probable nominee. This deeply unfortunate timing looks political and has potent political implications even if it's not driven by partisan motivations. And it is the Biden administration's responsibility, as its Justice Department reportedly delayed the investigation of Mr. Trump for a year and then rushed to indict him well into GOP primary season. He also said that the case involved novel applications of the law. In other words, it would require some dubious interpretations of the law to argue that Trump should be convicted. Now, let's talk about election integrity. Democrats have criticized Trump for contesting the 2020 election, but we seem to have completely forgotten all the times Democrats contested elections.
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president who got illegitimate foreign help. He knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did. I do think that he knows that he's an illegitimate president.
After the 2016 election, Democrats often said that our elections were not secure, that we'd been hacked by Russia.
I mean, as we try to grapple with what the Russians did to our election last year, as we try to figure out how ambitious and how damaging their attacks were on our election system, part of the reason it's hard to get a handle on it is because there's no one person in charge of defending our whole election system. No one person in charge of defending and monitoring the safety of all the zillions of different little local election systems we've got all over the country.
Before the 2020 election, Hillary Clinton also said that she suspected that Republicans would try to mess with the election and said that Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstance.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is. We've seen a couple of cases, like in Wisconsin, where they did everything they could to mess up voting, but because courts had ordered absentee ballots to be counted if they were postmarked on Election Day, Democrats actually won some important races there.
Clinton also expressed doubts about the 2024 election.
Right-wing extremists already have a plan to literally steal the next presidential election. And they're not making a secret of it.
So if it's okay for Democrats to express doubts about elections, the same standard should be applied for Republicans. Here is another threat to democracy. Democrats are against requiring voter IDs. In California, they made it illegal for local governments to require residents to show ID to vote. If you want to protect the integrity of our elections, it's pretty minimal to require voter ID. Almost all the Western nations require ID to vote. The reason Democrats say they're against voter ID is that Black people would somehow be disenfranchised by an ID requirement. But this is pretty racist. They're basically saying that Black people are incapable of obtaining a photo ID. I encourage you to watch this video where someone asked people if requiring voter ID was racist. All the liberal white people said it was, and all the Black people said it wasn't. And all the Black people, of course, had IDs.
Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any Black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
Do you know any Black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Also incredibly ironic that the same Democrats who say that voter IDs will disenfranchise Black people were the same people who wanted vaccine passports for a vaccine that didn't prevent infection or transmission. These same people didn't talk about how vaccine mandates would disproportionately affect Black people, since vaccine hesitancy is higher among Black people compared to the rest of the population. The Democrats used to be for the working class, and the Republicans were seen as the party of the rich or the corporations. Things have now shifted. The Democratic Party has increasingly become the party of the elite, the affluent.
The Democratic Party completely forgot its relationship with labor. The Democratic Party, when I was growing up, was cops, firefighters, auto workers, factory workers. They completely sold them out with these trade bills, and the labor union movement has been crushed in it. They don't even stand up for Amazon driver, Amazon or Uber drivers. Democrats don't care about that stuff anymore. They used to be labor-oriented, right? And they became completely corporate, and that's why they had to destroy Bernie Sanders. Bernie was beating Trump 54 to I think 40, 45 or 46. And in the same polls were showing Hillary losing to him, but the party wanted a corporate-friendly, military-friendly, candidate, and they'd rather lose the election than have somebody who could threaten the corporate profit-taking and the mercantile interests of these big companies. So for me, I was 10 times worse than Bernie Sanders.
The Democratic Party has also completely aligned itself with the U.S. security state. There used to be some Democrats that tried to hold these agencies in check. For example, in the 1970s, Senator Frank Church, a Democrat, led an effort to investigate abuses by these agencies. It revealed an unfathomable level of corruption. There was Project MKUltra, when the CIA experimented on human subjects, often against their knowledge. They used drugs like LSD, electroshock, radiation, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, and other forms of torture to manipulate their subjects. The goal was to explore possibilities of controlling humans. Then there was Project Mockingbird, where the CIA recruited journalists to spread lies and propaganda through the media. There was COINTELPRO, in which the FBI infiltrated domestic organizations that were seen as subversive, like civil rights activists, environmentalists, protesters of the Vietnam War, communists. They infiltrated these groups to try to sabotage and discredit them. Do we really think that these agencies are all cleaned up now? That's not to say that everyone in these agencies is bad, but now the Democratic Party is almost completely uncritical of them. Now, whenever some members of the US security state announce that they're against Trump, the Democratic Party aligns with them, even if they're known liars. The Democratic Party is now also the party of Big Pharma. Though the COVID vaccines were manufactured during Trump's administration, the Democrats were the ones who wanted to force everyone to take them. What happened to my body, my choice? I guess it doesn't apply when it comes to vaccines, even when they don't stop infection or transmission. The Democratic Party has also become the party of the military-industrial complex. Nothing makes this clearer than the fact that Kamala Harris has the endorsement of Dick Cheney and other neocons. When people like Dick Cheney endorse Kamala Harris, they're telling you that she's better than Trump for the war machine. She can be counted on to drag the American people into the next forever war. We should remind ourselves of who Dick Cheney is. Dick Cheney and other neocons in the Bush administration knowingly lied about WMDs and tricked Americans to support the Iraq War. For more on that, you can see this article, which I'll link to below. And what was the result of the Iraq War? We spent trillions of dollars and left Iraq worse than we'd found it, killed more Iraqis than Saddam did, destabilized the region, created ISIS. It drove millions of refugees from the region to Europe, which is destabilizing Europe, which probably contributed to Brexit and the riots over immigration that have been happening there. The Bush administration was also horrible on civil liberties. They imprisoned U.S. citizens without due process, all in the name of fighting terror. We got the Patriot Act and other programs that undermined our civil rights. Many of these programs were sold to the public as temporary measures, but turned out to be permanent. There were torture programs, etc. What has the Trump administration done that could compare to the destruction of the Bush-Cheney administration? It wasn't that long ago that being associated with the Iraq War was a major liability. In 2008, the fact that Obama had been against the war from the beginning was something that helped his candidacy. And in 2016, the fact that Hillary Clinton had been for the war was still a liability. A lot of the people who left the Democratic Party hated Dick Cheney in the past, and they still hate Dick Cheney. They haven't changed their values, but what has changed is the Democratic Party. It has essentially merged with the Bush-era neocon party.
There was once a wing of the Democratic Party that stood up to the war industry. J. William Fulbright, George McGovern, G. McCarthy, Mike Gravel, William Proxmire, of course, Dennis Kucinich. But that was largely decades ago. The new Democrats, especially with the presidency of Bill Clinton, became shills, not only for corporate America, but the arms industry. No weapons system is too costly. No war, no matter how disastrous, goes unfunded. The massive military budget, $858 billion in military spending allocated for fiscal year 2023. It just keeps growing.
And now, let's look at Kamala Harris as a candidate. In 2021, Biden had given her the task of helping to stem the flow of migrants at the border. Here was an interview she did a few months after that.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
So the reason this came up as an issue was that people had been criticizing her for not having been to the border yet. So when she was asked about it, she could have just answered something like, no, I haven't been there yet. But instead, she repeated multiple times, we've been to the border, even though she hadn't. And this just goes to show just how comfortable she is with lying.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. We need more. I was just down at the border talking with border agents, and they will tell you, and I'm sure you probably, I know you investigate and you are a serious journalist. They will tell you, we need more judges. We need to process those cases faster. We need the support for those cases that should be prosecuted. They need more resources, and Congress ultimately is the only place that's going to get fixed, Brett.
Well,
that's how the system works.
She says we've had a broken immigration system that dated back to before Trump. But here's a chart showing the number of people who've been getting through under the different administrations. The yellow bars are for what's called other foreign nationals. So these are not people who came from the usual legal channels like family or work visas, etc. These are people who are coming without prior authorization and includes people who don't turn themselves into Border Patrol and those who turn themselves over to Border Patrol and seek asylum. So the correct answer to the question that the interviewer asked was that the crisis started under the Biden-Harris administration. And the reason it happened then was because very soon after Biden and Harris took office, their administration enacted 94 executive orders which rescinded the previous border policies, including many of Trump's. But Kamala Harris distracts us by saying that we need more judges, we need to process those cases faster, they need more resources, and for that we need Congress. But that's not true, because the administration can enact executive orders, which has nothing to do with Congress. And actually, just recently, in June of this year, 2024, Biden had signed an executive order that cracked down on asylum seekers, which has been bringing the number of migrants down dramatically. Undocumented crossings at the southern border have fallen to a 3-year low, the lowest in Biden's presidency, just a short time after he signed the executive order in June. But for some reason, Kamala Harris doesn't call attention to this, maybe because it doesn't look good for the administration, because it makes it very clear that Congress has nothing to do with it. Which brings us to a question. If they could have made a difference with an executive order like the one Biden made in June, why did they wait so long to do it? Why did they wait till 2024? Did it have something to do with an election coming up? Now, of course, Trump himself is not an elegant speaker either.
I know words, I have the best words.
But people are willing to overlook a lot of his flaws because he's not crafted in his speeches. He seems to actually say whatever's on his mind. And it's not as if his supporters don't know that he's lied or exaggerated before. But I would wager that they prefer the loose, spontaneous lies to the calculated lies of someone like Kamala Harris, or Hillary Clinton, for that matter. But for a lot of people, especially some of the ex-Democrats that have moved to Trump, I suspect that the reason they've gone to Trump isn't really about the man himself. It's about something much bigger. And that's what we'll discuss in the next and final section.
This sounds like political presidential talk to me, and I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
Probably not, but I do get tired of seeing the country ripped off.
Why would you not?
I just don't think I really have the inclination to do it. I love what I'm doing. I really like it.
Also, it doesn't pay as well.
No, it doesn't. But, you know, I just probably wouldn't do it, Oprah. I probably wouldn't, but I do get tired of seeing what's happening with this country. And if it got so bad, I would never want to rule it out totally, because I really am tired of seeing what's happening with this country.
Lots of liberals used to love Trump.
Stop! You know our wings come with free celery. Jump in! You know these ladies are good for you.
Looks like you killed a squirrel to me and put it right on top of your head.
You're one to talk. Your hair looks exactly like mine.
But at some point, after he launched his campaign for presidency, the entire corporate media, Hollywood, the U.S. security state, and other establishment elites turned on him. Why? It's not because he suddenly turned into Hitler or changed his core values, or that his character flaws changed. Those had been on display for many decades. He did make some powerful enemies, and we've seen how powerful people can manipulate the media to turn on someone. We saw that on a much smaller scale in the case of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, for example. Anthony Fauci and other members of the government got him and others vilified and censored. Now imagine what the situation could look like when you've pissed off people that are part of the military-industrial complex or powerful corporations or the U.S. security state.
He's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
Elected officials also have to be careful about pissing off certain permanent members of the government bureaucracy. These permanent bureaucrats often have their own agendas, which aren't always aligned with elected officials, including incoming presidents. They sometimes form loose alliances with each other and collaborate toward common agendas. After decades of working in these agencies, they may share more of the same ideologies with each other than they do with incoming presidents, who will come and go. In fact, even though these people may be part of the executive branch, sometimes the president only has limited control over them. Past presidents have spoken about this. In an op-ed in 1963, Truman wrote that he was disturbed by how the CIA had essentially become a policy-making arm of the government. He said, "I think it has become necessary to take another look at the purpose and operations at our Central Intelligence Agency. At times, the intelligence reports tended to be slanted to conform to established positions of a given department. Therefore, I decided to set up a special organization charged with the collection of all intelligence reports from every available source, and to have those reports reach me as president without the departmental treatment or interpretations. I wanted and needed the information in its natural raw state. But the most important thing about this move was to guard against the chance of intelligence being used to influence or to lead the president into unwise decisions. For some time, I have been disturbed by the way CIA has been diverted from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government." JFK was also famously at odds with the CIA when he was in office. In Eisenhower's farewell address, he warned of the growing influence of the military-industrial complex.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
And let's remember, the FBI tried to prevent Trump from getting reelected when they helped get the Hunter Biden laptop story suppressed. Apparently, President George W. Bush also once said some chilling words to Glenn Beck, a conservative political commentator and radio host. Bush told Glenn that no matter who was elected, the policies would basically remain the same. Bush pointed to the desk in the Oval Office and said that any man who sits behind that desk, anybody, doesn't matter who it is, Hillary Clinton or anybody, when they sit behind that desk, they'll realize they have very few options. Their hands are tied. Don't worry, whoever sits in that chair will execute things pretty much the same way I have. And indeed, Bush's prediction largely bore out. Obama ran his campaign on promising to shut Guantanamo Bay, but he didn't succeed, and he had run as a peace candidate, but ended up dropping more bombs in the Middle East than Bush. And by the way, so did Trump. He inherited the war against ISIS from Obama and continued aggressively bombing the Middle East. But he still managed to make enemies in the military-industrial complex because he didn't support things like regime change wars. Neocons and the U.S. security state recognized early on that Trump would be a great threat to their agenda. And they were right to, because he would go on to become the first American president in decades that didn't get the U.S. involved in any new wars. Members of the military did try to thwart or subvert him on a number of occasions. According to a U.S. Special Representative for Syria engagement, defense officials routinely misled Trump into believing the American troop count was a lot lower than it actually was. Quote, "We were always playing shell games to make it not clear to our leadership how many troops we had there," he said. So these people who are unelected but exert influence on elected officials like presidents have sometimes been called the deep state. A 2013 article in the New York Times defined the deep state as a hard-to-perceive level of government or super control that exists regardless of elections and that may thwart popular movements or radical change. Aaron Good, who wrote a book about the deep state, called it an obscured, dominant, supranational source of undemocratic power. The deep state includes captains of industry, those influential members of big business that influence or even control elected officials, because we now have a very tight relationship between corporate and government powers. For example, because of emails that were leaked through WikiLeaks, we know that Citigroup chose Obama's cabinet. 1 month before the presidential election of 2008, the giant Wall Street bank Citigroup submitted to the Obama campaign a list of its preferred candidates for cabinet positions in an Obama administration. This list corresponds almost exactly to the eventual composition of Barack Obama's cabinet. The emails revealed the real power behind the facade of democratically elected officials.
I've spent 40 years suing these agencies. I've had suits involving almost all of the major agencies, NIH, CDC, FDA, HHS, Department of Agriculture, because I've spent 20 years suing factory farms and big processed food producers. I saw how that agency has been taken over by industrial agriculture and, has completely drifted away from its mission of protecting small family farmers. Probably 20% of the 500 environmental cases that I've been involved with have been against EPA. Which is captured by the pesticide industry, by the oil and coal industry. When I sued Monsanto, we came across emails, secret emails that Monsanto had exchanged with the head of the pesticide division, a guy called Jess Rowland, who was taking a federal paycheck and supposedly working for the taxpayer, but secretly he was working for Monsanto. And this is the problem, is that most of the people who work at these agencies are well-intentioned individuals. They're patriots. They're good government employees, good public servants. But the people who tend to rise to the top and become the division heads, the branch heads, and of course, the directors of those departments are people who are in the tank with the industry. I've spent a lot of my life studying the CIA because my family's 60-year fistfight with that agency. I know how my uncle was going to try to reorganize the agency if he hadn't been killed. I know exactly what my father was going to do with the agency. You need to get rid of the perverse incentives, these financial entanglements that the agencies have with the industries they're supposed to regulate.
Trump and his followers have sometimes referred to the more insidious faction of the deep state as the swamp. When Trump first ran for president, he promised to drain the swamp. The thing is, he didn't. He appointed some swamp members during his first term. This is a legitimate criticism of him. What he has told RFK Jr. is that he's made some mistakes with hiring.
And President Trump, I think, tried to do that the last time, to drain the swamp. And he was well-intentioned, but he didn't know how to do it. And he said that to me. He said, I didn't know anything about governing. And he said, we won this election, and then all of a sudden, you got to fill 60,000 jobs or something like that. And he said, I was surrounded by people, by lobbyists and business interests who were saying, you got to appoint this guy, you got to appoint that guy, and that's what he did. He told me, I don't want to do that again. He said, those were bad guys, and this time we're going to do something different. He wants to leave a legacy. He's not going to run again. He's a lame duck president. And he wants to do something that's good for this country. I know how to do that, and he's asked me to help him do that. So if we do that, if he does what he says, I'm very optimistic that we can actually remedy a lot of this corruption.
Now that Kennedy will play a role in a Trump administration, will Trump do better if he's given another opportunity to be president? It remains to be seen. Even if both he and Kennedy have the best intentions, it's probably not easy to do, which is why it hasn't been done before. But what does seem apparent is that a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for the machine, or the swamp, or whatever you want to call it. Because the machine, the DNC, and its corporate media minions clearly indicated that they preferred her when they installed her as the candidate. This machine is why the DNC would rather go with a weak candidate like Harris than someone like Bernie Sanders or RFK Jr., even though polls had shown that they had a better shot at beating Trump. The thing about Donald Trump is that, love him or hate him, he seems to have a mind of his own. If he were to get elected again, he would have this silly notion that he'll actually be running things. And that's why he's a threat to powerful interests. That's their main issue with him. And while he was pissing off many establishment elites, Trump did something historic. He took over the Republican Party from within. It's no longer the same party. Nothing makes this clearer than watching people cheer someone like Kennedy at one of Trump's rallies.
And Trump introduces him, and people go crazy for RFK. This has made his whole life as an environmentalist. And now he's fighting Big Pharma the last 10, 15 years, which is why the media has turned him into a crazy. But of course, he's not crazy. He's on point with that. And Republicans are cheering that. Watch this. No, Bobby made his bones as an environmental lawyer. They're cheering an environmentalist. That's what's happening at a Republican presidential campaign.
A few hours after the assassination attempt at Butler, I got a call from a safe food advocate named Kelly Means, who's been fighting for many years to try to end the corruption at CDC and FDA and USDA.
So he's talking about taking on the regulatory agencies and fighting big corporations. And they're cheering it at a Republican presidential rally. Let that sink in, how it has flipped and how immediately Donald Trump is miles to the left of Kamala Harris.
I think the modern Democratic Party is an existential threat to the Republic. And although I am a Democrat, I've been a Democrat my whole life, the party that I see in front of me today is literally the inverse of the party I signed up for. This is now the party of war. This is the party of racism. This is the party of censorship. I don't recognize this party. There is no conceivable scenario in which I would vote for Kamala Harris. Am I open to voting for Trump? I am. I'm especially open to it if he is partnered with Bobby Kennedy, because what that tells me is that my values, which are a much closer match for Bobby's, are represented in that administration. And that's really what I want. I want a coalition to redefine American politics because, frankly, we have a long-standing problem with corruption, which has now turned into something else with the modern Democratic Party.
This is why so many old establishment Republicans have backed Kamala Harris. They don't belong in this new populist party. The movement is not about Donald Trump. He's just a leader that's currently holding the umbrella for a very diverse group of people. And this is probably what you've been missing if you've been relying on corporate media for your news. The media has told you that Trump supporters are all deplorable, stupid, and bigoted. What they don't show you are all the people who are part of this coalition because they care about corruption, the chronic health epidemic, toxic chemicals in our food and the environment, and free speech. What they don't show you are people like Callie and Casey Means, who, along with RFK Jr., are advising Trump and spearheading what they call MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again.
The Trump campaign has been extremely interested in the policy of why kids are getting so sick. And if you go back a year ago, President Trump actually at rallies to loud applause has been talking very similar points to RFK. Trump wants this to be a generational issue for him. And whatever you think, and I used to be a never-Trumper, watching him care about this issue, watching what's happening with the RFK, watching what's happening of how that's resonating with voters, seeing smally, from my small vantage point inside, there is tremendous connection of these two men and moral clarity of seeing what's happening.
Over the last 50 years in the United States, we have seen rapidly rising rates of chronic illnesses throughout the entire body. It's caused by toxic American ultra-processed industrial food, toxic American chemicals, toxic American medications, and our toxic sedentary indoor lifestyles. You would think that the American healthcare system and our government agencies would be clamoring to fix metabolic health and reduce American suffering and costs. But they're not. They are deafeningly silent. I learned virtually nothing at Stanford Medical School about the tens of thousands of scientific papers that elucidate these root causes of why American health is plummeting and how environmental factors are causing it. In medical school, I didn't learn that 95% of the people who created the recent USDA food guidelines for America had significant conflicts of interest with the food industry. I did not learn that the 8 billion tons of plastic that have been produced just in the last 100 years, being broken down into microplastics that are now filling our food, our water, and we are now even inhaling them in our air. And that very recent research from just the past couple of months tells us that now about 0.5% of our brains by weight are now plastic. I didn't learn that there are more than 80,000 toxins that have entered our food, water, air, and homes by industry, many of which are banned in Europe.
And my question is this, and to anyone kind of considering voting in this election, Trump is going to say stupid shit. He is Trump. We know who he is. There's two important questions to ask. Who sees this corruption and institutional capture that's going to destroy our country, I think, to an existential level. And who is willing to suffer that blowback?
It seems like without a person that's a total outsider like Trump, that's being so attacked, the fact that it's not just that they disagree with him, they attack him, it's that they do it in unison, they do it so coordinated that you realize there is a machine behind this, and that they repeat the same talking points over and, I mean, it's like they're given a script, and that there's no repercussions for lies. There's, with the Russiagate stuff, with all the various different things that have been concocted to try to take him out, there's no one gets in trouble, and the same people are still disseminating the news. And more people, I think, are aware of that than ever before, and more people aware of this institutional capture.
This video's purpose is not to tell you who to vote for. It's to empower you to think for yourself. Don't fall victim to propaganda. Do your own research.